There's a unique kind of silence that follows a betrayal delivered by text message. It's not the roaring silence of a slammed door, or the heavy, suffocating silence of a tearful goodbye. It's a digital silence, a void punctuated by the faint, indifferent hum of a refrigerator. That's the silence that filled my kitchen when I read the words from my daughter, Chloe. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand, a small, cold rectangle of glass and metal that had just surgically removed me from one of the most significant days of her life. Don't come to my wedding. It'll be live streamed, not even a hi mom to begin, or a love you to end. Just a clinical, efficient little sentence. It was followed by a thumbs up emoji, a final, casual twist of the knife. I stared at it for a long time, the little yellow hand mockingly cheerful. A live stream. As if I was some distant fan, some online follower, and not the woman whose body had housed her, whose hands had soothed her fevers, whose savings had funded her entire existence. I was to be a spectator to my own daughter's life, watching through a screen like a stranger, while she stood at an altar I was paying for. That was the part that truly resonated in the quiet hum of the kitchen. The altar, the ridiculously expensive French lace dress, the 5-tier cake with hand-painted sugar flowers, the historic venue with its sweeping gardens and crystal chandeliers, all of it, every last overpriced detail, was being funded by me. I was the silent, invisible partner in this grand production, the bank account from which a fairy tale was being withdrawn. And my reward for this lifelong investment? A link to a website. A password for the live feed. It wasn't an act of cruelty born from anger or a heated argument. It was worse. It was an act of convenience. An administrative decision. I imagined the conversation between her and her fiancé, Julian. Him, with his carefully curated aesthetic and his casual disdain for anything he considered provincial, which included me, my home, and my entire way of life. Chloe, darling, I could almost hear him saying, his voice smooth as polished stone, your mother is wonderful, of course. But she doesn't quite fit the aesthetic, you know. It's a very specific vibe we are curating, and Chloe, my Chloe, who once couldn't sleep without me checking for monsters under her bed, would have nodded. You're right, she'd say. It's just easier this way. She gets so emotional. We'll just stream it for her. She'll understand they had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness, my generosity for infinite, unconditional compliance. They saw me not as a person, but as a utility. A service provider. And when my physical presence became inconvenient to their vibe, I was to be neatly and efficiently decommissioned. I placed the phone screen down on the granite countertop I'd scrimped and saved for 15 years ago, a purchase that had felt like the height of luxury at the time. The granite felt cool and solid beneath my trembling fingers. The initial shock, that sharp, piercing pain in my chest, began to recede. And in its place, something else began to rise. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity. A cold, diamond-hard clarity. I thought of my late husband, Robert. A man of few words but deep principles. He used to say, Eleanor, never let anyone mistake your kindness for a lack of intelligence. 4 years, I had let them. I had let them believe I was just simple, dependable mom, with her simple, dependable checkbook. I had let them build a cage for me out of their expectations and my sacrifices. And with one little text message, they had handed me the key. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade, replaced by a different sound in my mind, the satisfying, solid click of a lock disengaging. Okay, I thought, taking a slow, deep breath that felt like the first real one I'd taken in years. I knew what to do. If this is the kind of story that you feel in your bones, the kind of quiet justice you've been waiting to see, then I invite you to follow along. Subscribe to my channel, because I'm going to tell you exactly how a live-streamed wedding became the catalyst for a life they never knew I was capable of living. My life with Robert was built on a foundation of quiet partnership and shared dreams, dreams that we deferred for the sake of our children. When Chloe was born, a tiny, screaming miracle with a full head of dark hair, I was on the cusp of a promising career in architectural restoration. I had a gift for seeing the potential in forgotten buildings, for understanding the bones of a structure, and breathing new life into it. Robert, a man who could find poetry in a balance sheet, was a financial analyst, but his real genius was in long-term, patient investing. We were a team. I would find the undervalued properties, and he would find the undervalued stocks. Our plan was to build a solid nest egg, and then, once the children were grown, we would travel the world, restoring old villas in Tuscany, maybe a riad in Morocco. That was the blueprint for our life together. But life, as it so often does, erases the finest lines on any blueprint. Chloe was a demanding child, not in a malicious way, but with an intensity that consumed all the oxygen in a room. She needed more. More attention, more validation, more things. Her ballet lessons became a serious pursuit, requiring private coaching and expensive point shoes. Her mild dyslexia required a specialized tutor. Her desire for social acceptance required the right clothes, the right summer camps, the right everything. And I, her mother, was the architect of her happiness. I packed away my drafting tools and my dreams of Tuscany, and devoted myself to the intricate, demanding structure of her childhood. My second child, her brother Michael, was an easier soul, but he followed Chloe's lead. The standard had been set. When Chloe got a used but reliable car for her 16th birthday, Michael expected the same. When her college tuition was paid in full, his had to be as well. Robert and I never begrudged them this. We loved them. It's what parents do. You sacrifice. You pour yourself into them like concrete into a foundation, hoping they will build something strong and beautiful on top of it. Robert and I continued our quiet investing, living modestly, always well below our means. The kids saw our 10-year-old car, our simple family vacations to national parks instead of European capitals, our sturdy but unfashionable furniture, and they drew their own conclusions. They assumed we were comfortable, but limited. They never saw the meticulously maintained ledgers Robert kept, or the hours I spent researching market trends after they went to bed. They never knew that their father's boring hobby was making us, quietly and methodically, wealthy. They saw a life of sensible shoes and home-cooked meals, and they translated that into a story of middle-class struggle. A story that, in their adulthood, made them feel entitled to the fruits of our discipline. After Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, the dynamic shifted. The grief was a chasm, and for a time, I was lost in it. Chloe and Michael were there, of course, with sad faces and casseroles, but their concern was proprietary. They began to speak of the estate, as if it were a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow they had patiently waited for. They were shocked and, I think, a little disappointed when Robert's will left everything directly and unequivocally to me. There were no trusts for them, no immediate payouts. Robert trusted me to be the steward of our life's work, just as I had always been. But my children saw it differently. They saw me as a gatekeeper. From that day on, their requests for money became bolder, laced with a new kind of passive-aggressive urgency. Chloe's little emergency with her credit card debt. Michael's once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity that required a seed investment. I always said yes. Grief made me compliant, and the habit of a lifetime of giving was too deeply ingrained to break. I was their mother. It was my job to fix things. It was my job to make sure they were happy. I never showed them the portfolio. I never spoke of the real numbers. In my mind, that money was for my old age, for the security Robert and I had planned. It was our quiet victory, the secret garden we had tended together. But to them, I was just mom, in the same old house, with a finite pool of their late father's pension to draw from. A resource to be managed, and lately, a problem to be solved. And now, my daughter was getting married. And I, the inconvenient, emotional, out-of-vibe mother, was being relegated to a browser window. The arrival of Julian into Chloe's life 2 years ago was like adding an accelerant to a slow-burning fire. On the surface, he was perfect. He was handsome in that sharp, angular way that looks good in expensive suits, worked in private equity, and spoke about wine and modern art with an air of effortless authority. Chloe was mesmerized. She had always been drawn to shiny things, and Julian was the shiniest man she had ever met. I, however, saw something else. I saw it in the way his eyes would scan our living room, not with interest, but with a kind of anthropological curiosity, as if he were studying the quaint customs of a forgotten tribe. I saw it in the way he'd call me Eleanor instead of Mrs. Davison, a subtle but deliberate repositioning of our relationship from one of respect to one of peers, a peer he clearly felt superior to. He was a master of the backhanded compliment. "This is a wonderful roast, Eleanor," he'd say at Sunday dinner. "It's so rustic." So authentic, the implication was clear. It was the food of simple people, a charming artifact of a life he had long since transcended. Chloe, desperate for his approval, began to echo his sentiments. Our home, the place she had grown up, was suddenly cluttered. My taste in furniture was dated. My desire to host family holidays was a lot of pressure. They started talking about my future, as if I weren't in the room. "We need to think about what's best for Mom in the long run," Chloe would say, looking at Julian for confirmation. "This house is so big for her. The upkeep must be a nightmare." Julian would nod sagely. "A nice condo would be much more manageable. Something secure. We could help you find one, Eleanor." Of course they were planning my decline, packaging my marginalization as an act of love. The wedding planning was where their vision for my irrelevance truly took flight. It began with the announcement of their engagement, which I learned about from a glossy, professionally photographed post on social media, just like the rest of the world. The caption read, "I said yes to my forever with my soulmate." I was still waiting for the phone call. When it finally came, it wasn't a call, but a summons. "Mom, we need to talk about the budget." They set me down in their minimalist grey and white apartment, a place that felt more like a corporate boardroom than a home, and presented me with a binder. It was tabbed, color-coded, and filled with spreadsheets. This was Julian's handiwork. He walked me through it, his tone patient and condescending, as if explaining a complex financial instrument to a child. The venue was a historic estate that charged a per-head fee equivalent to my monthly mortgage payment. The caterer specialized in deconstructed cuisine, which seemed to mean tiny portions for astronomical prices. Chloe's dress was a Parisian designer I'd never heard of, a whisper of silk and lace that cost more than my car. As Julian clicked through the presentation, he kept using the word we think this is a necessary investment. We've decided the flower arrangements are non-negotiable. The we, I quickly realized, meant him and Chloe. That investment was to come from me. I was not a participant in the we, I was the bank. I remember feeling a dull ache in my chest as I looked at my daughter's beaming face. She was so caught up in the fantasy Julian was selling her, the fantasy of a life so grand and important that it had no room for its own origins. She saw the binder not as a list of demands, but as her birthright. I had raised her to believe she could have anything she wanted, and Julian had taught her that she shouldn't have to pay for it. I said I would help, of course. The habit of sacrifice was a powerful one. But I set a limit, a generous one, far more than they could have reasonably expected. It was a number that represented a significant portion of what they believed was my entire net worth. They accepted it with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. I could see the flicker of disappointment, the unspoken calculation. It wasn't enough to fund the entire dream. But they took it. And then, the texts for extras started. "Mom, the photographer has a premium package with drone footage." "Mom, Julian's parents are flying in from London, and we thought it would be nice to host a welcome dinner at the Grand." Each request chipped away not just at my bank account, but at my soul. And then came the text. The final, brutal invoice for a lifetime of unconditional love. Don't come to my wedding. It'll be live streamed. They had gotten what they could from my bank account, and now they were dispensing with the inconvenient person attached to it. For about an hour after reading the text, I did nothing. I simply stood at my kitchen counter, tracing the cool, swirling patterns in the granite. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of hurt and shock, grew still. It was the kind of stillness that precedes a storm, a gathering of forces. The initial pain was real, a physical clenching in my gut, but it was being rapidly replaced by something far more potent, a profound and liberating sense of finality. This wasn't just an insult, it was a release. I had been released from my obligations. I walked into my study, a room filled with books and memories, and sat down at the heavy oak desk that had been Robert's. For years, this room had been my sanctuary, but also a monument to a life I had put on hold. The shelves were lined with books on architectural history, their spines uncracked. My old drafting tools lay dormant in a leather roll. I had told myself I was preserving them. Now I understood I had been entombing them. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk and pulled out a stack of photo albums. I didn't linger on the happy memories, the smiling baby pictures, or the proud graduation photos. Instead, I looked at them with the detached eye of an accountant. I saw the braces that cost a small fortune. The semester abroad in Spain. The down payment I'd given Chloe for her first apartment, a gift she had accepted as her due. I wasn't feeling sentimental. I was taking inventory. Every photograph was a receipt, a proof of payment for a service that had now been terminated. My love had been treated as a commodity, so I would now treat my resources with the same dispassionate logic. The hurt was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer the dominant frequency. The dominant frequency was resolve. A cold, clear note of it rang through me. The role of mom, the enabler, was over. The character had been written out of the show. It was time for a new role. Eleanor, the architect of her own life. I pulled a fresh legal pad from the desk drawer, its yellow pages clean and unmarked. At the top, I wrote, the plan. The first point was simple: call Mr. Davis. Arthur Davies had been Robert's lawyer, and, over the years, had become a trusted friend. He was a kind, old-school gentleman who still wore three-piece suits and believed in the sanctity of a handshake. He knew about Robert's portfolio. He knew the truth. I picked up the phone, my hand perfectly steady. His secretary put me through immediately. Eleanor, he said, his voice warm and concerned. How are you? I'm about to be much better, Arthur, I said, and the words felt truer than anything I had said in years. I need to schedule an urgent meeting. I'm restructuring. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. Is everything all right? He asked. Perfectly, I replied, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time that day. I've just received some clarifying information about my future. It seems my presence is no longer required at my daughter's wedding. I'm being offered a live stream instead. The silence on the phone was thick with disbelief, then a low, indignant huff. She what? You heard me, Arthur, I said, my voice calm and even. So, it's time to make some adjustments. The Bank of Mom is officially closing its doors. Permanently. Good God, Eleanor. Robert would be spinning, he said, his professional decorum cracking. Well, I said, looking at the blank yellow page of my legal pad, let's make sure he can rest easy. When can you see me? We made an appointment for the following morning. After I hung up, I sat at the desk for a long while. The house was silent around me. It was no longer the silence of emptiness, but the silence of possibility. The future, which had felt like a slow, managed decline into a secure condo, suddenly yawned open into a vast, uncharted territory. I picked up my pen and, under the heading The Plan, I began to write. Point 2, Close the joint wedding account. Point 3. Notify all vendors of termination of financial responsibility. Point 4. Liquidate specific assets and create a new, impenetrable trust. Point 5. Sell the house. Point 6. Book a trip to Tuscany. I wrote with a speed and precision I hadn't felt in decades. It was like my old self, the architect, was finally awake, dusting off her tools and looking at the ruins of her old life, not with despair, but with a clear vision of what she could build in its place. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Davies, and Finch with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before Robert died. The air smelled of old leather and floor wax, a comforting aroma of stability and order. Arthur greeted me himself, his kind, craggy face etched with concern. He ushered me into his large, wood-paneled office, a fortress of legal precedent and quiet dignity. He had already ordered coffee, just the way I liked it. He was that kind of man. "Eleanor," he began, once we were seated across his enormous mahogany desk. "Tell me everything. And don't spare the details." So I did. I told him about Julian's condescension, about the binder, about the constant financial pressure. And then I took out my phone and showed him the text message. He put on his reading glasses, squinting at the small screen. He read it once, then twice. He took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly. "In my 45 years of practicing law," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "I have dealt with contested wills, bitter divorces, and corporate betrayals. But this is a special kind of cruelty. A uniquely modern and cowardly kind of cruelty." His validation was like a balm on a wound I hadn't realized was still so raw. It wasn't just my own hurt feeling, it was objectively, fundamentally wrong. "Robert loved that girl more than anything," Arthur murmured, shaking his head. "He would be appalled." "Utterly appalled he would be, Arthur," I agreed. "But he would also expect me to handle it. He trusted me to be the guardian of what we built. And I have not been a very good guardian lately." I opened my briefcase and pulled out the folder I had prepared. It contained the latest statements from the portfolio. Arthur's eyes widened slightly as he scanned the top page. "My word, Eleanor. You've done well. Even better than I thought." "Robert was a brilliant teacher," I said simply. "And I was a good student. We lived on his salary. We invested mine, and after he retired, we invested everything. The children have no idea. They see this house, my old car, and they assume I'm living on a widow's pension and the dregs of a life insurance policy. They believe my total worth is tied up in the equity of this property." I leaned forward. "They believe the wedding budget I gave them was a stretch for me. A huge sacrifice. They have no concept of the reality." Arthur leaned back in his chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. He understood immediately. The dramatic irony was not lost on him. "So, they are not just ungrateful," he said. "They are fools. They are standing in a diamond mine, complaining about the price of coal." "Exactly," I said. "And they've just been fired from the mining company." I laid out my plan, point by point. Arthur listened intently, nodding, his legal mind already turning the gears. "Closing the joint account is simple," he said. "We can do that this morning. The vendor notifications will be more delicate. We'll draft a formal letter from the firm, stating that as of this date, you are no longer party to any financial agreements made by Chloe Davison or Julian Croft. We'll send it via registered mail and email to every vendor on the list you provided. It will be ironclad." He paused, tapping a pen on his desk. "Selling the house is a big step, Eleanor. Are you sure?" "This house stopped being a home a long time ago, Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "It's become a museum of my sacrifices. It's a constant reminder of the life I put on hold. I don't want to live in a museum anymore. I want to live in a home. A home that I choose." "For me," he nodded, understanding completely. And the trust, he asked. I want to create a new one, I explained. The Eleanor Davison Trust. Its sole beneficiary, for the remainder of my life, is me. We can structure it to provide for my care if I become incapacitated, but until then, I have complete control. We can place the bulk of the liquid assets into it immediately. I want it to be a fortress for the next 2 hours. We worked. We made phone calls. We drafted letters. We signed documents. With each signature, I felt a layer of weight lift from my shoulders. It was a surgical procedure. We were excising a toxic dependency from my life, and the work was clean, precise, and deeply satisfying. When we were finished, Arthur walked me to the door. You know, Eleanor, he said, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. Robert didn't leave you his fortune because he thought you were fragile. He left it to you because he knew you were the smartest person in the room. He knew that when the time came, you would know exactly what to do. I looked at him, my old friend, the last remaining link to my life with Robert, and I felt a surge of gratitude. He was right, I said. And as I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, I felt like I was walking on air. The architect was back at the drafting table, and the plans for my new life were spectacular. The first move was silent and digital. From Arthur's office, I transferred the entire balance of the Chloe's wedding joint account, a sum that was still quite substantial, into a new, private account in my name only. The transaction took less than 30 seconds. A few taps on a screen, and a financial lifeline they had taken for granted was severed. There was a quiet satisfaction in the finality of it, like deleting a corrupted file. The next step was more formal. Arthur's paralegal, a brisk and efficient young woman named Sarah, spent the afternoon drafting the letters. To the wedding planner, the 5-star venue, the Michelin-starred caterer, the celebrity florist, the Parisian bridal boutique. The language was polite, professional, and utterly immovable. Please be advised that as of this date, our client, Mrs. Eleanor Davison, will no longer be responsible for any current or future financial obligations incurred by Miss Chloe Davison or Mr. Julian Croft. All future invoices should be directed to them. For any questions regarding this matter, please contact the undersigned. A copy of each letter was sent via email for immediate notification, with the hard copies sent by registered mail to follow. We were building a paper wall they could not breach. I went home that afternoon and began my own work. I logged into the website for the florist Chloe had chosen, a place where a single centerpiece cost what I used to spend on groceries for a month. My credit card was saved on their site for the deposit. I found the payment method section and clicked delete. The system asked, "Are you sure?" I smiled. "Yes," I whispered to the empty room. "I am very sure." Next, I tackled the house. It was a beautiful home, a place of so many memories, both good and painful. But looking at it now, I saw only the upkeep, the ghosts of expectations, the sheer weight of it all. I called the top real estate agent in the city, a woman known for her aggressive marketing and quick sales. "I want to sell," I told her, my voice clear and decisive. "And I want to sell it fast. I'm not interested in sentiment. I'm interested in efficiency." She was at my door within the hour, a whirlwind of energy and ambition. She walked through the rooms, her eyes alight with the potential commission. "It's a classic," she said. "Great bones. A little dated, but we can stage it. We'll have it sold in a month, maybe less." "Good," I said. While she measured rooms and took notes, I sat at my desk and did something I had been putting off for years. I booked a trip. Not a sensible, budget-friendly tour, but a first-class, 2-month immersion in Italy. A villa in the Tuscan hills for the first month, a chic apartment in Rome for the second. I paid for it in full, without a moment's hesitation. The confirmation email arrived with a cheerful chime, a sound that felt like the opening notes of a new symphony. My symphony. I moved through the rest of the day in a state of calm, focused activity. I started sorting through decades of accumulated belongings. I was not sentimental. I was a curator, deciding what was worthy of being brought into my new life. Robert's books on finance and my books on architecture. They were coming with me. Chloe's childhood trophies and Michael's old sports equipment. They were being packed into boxes, destined for a storage unit they could retrieve at their convenience. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner and ate it on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The world felt quiet, brimming with potential. I was in the eye of the hurricane I had created, a place of perfect, serene calm. I knew the storm would break soon. The first emails from Arthur's office would have landed in the inboxes of the vendors. The first calls to Chloe and Julian would be coming. I was not afraid. I was ready. I was waiting. The phone remained silent that night, and the next morning. The quiet before the storm. I spent the day with the stager the real estate agent had hired, a young man with a flair for minimalism. He tactfully suggested removing most of my family photos. "We want buyers to imagine their own lives here," he explained. I agreed without a pang of regret. I was already imagining my own life elsewhere. The first tremor came not as a phone call, but as a text message from Chloe late the next afternoon. It was so different in tone from the last one. "Mom? The wedding planner just called me. She said she got a weird email from a lawyer. I think there's been some kind of mistake. Can you call her and clear it up? Her name is Genevieve." I looked at the message, at the casual assumption that I would immediately scurry to fix a problem for her. The old me would have called instantly, flustered and apologetic. The new me took a sip of her freshly brewed tea. I typed a simple sentence and sent it. "There is no mistake." The silence that followed my reply lasted exactly 17 minutes. I timed it. It was a tense, charged silence, the kind where you can almost hear the frantic exchange of messages happening on the other end. I imagined Chloe showing my text to Julian, the confusion morphing into indignation. Then, my phone rang. It was Chloe. I let it ring 4 times, a small act of reclaiming power, before answering. "Hello, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Mom? What is going on?" Her voice was high-pitched, laced with an unfamiliar note of panic. "Genevieve is freaking out. She said she got a legal letter saying you're not paying for anything anymore. And the venue just called and said the check for the final deposit bounced." "A bounced check, Mom? It's so embarrassing." "It wasn't a check, Chloe," I corrected her calmly. "It was an electronic transfer that was cancelled before it could be processed because the source account was closed." "There's a difference." There was a stunned silence. You closed the account?" "I did," I said. "Why would you do that? What is wrong with you? Are you trying to ruin my wedding?" The victimhood was instantaneous. In her world, my actions could have no other motivation than a direct, malicious desire to harm her. The idea that my actions might be about me, for me, was a concept her entitlement could not process. "No, Chloe," I said, my voice taking on a cool, clinical edge. "I am simply respecting your wishes. You made it clear that my presence was not wanted at your wedding. I have accepted that. It seems only logical that my financial presence should be withdrawn." As well I could hear Julian's voice in the background, a low, angry murmur. Then he was on the phone. His attempt at a calm, authoritative tone was paper-thin. "Eleanor. Julian here. I think there has been a serious miscommunication. We would never want you to feel excluded. The live stream idea was simply for convenience, given what, Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Given my age. My emotional state. My lack of vibe." He stammered, caught off guard. "No, of course not. It's a big, loud event. We were worried about you. We were trying to be considerate. The lie was so audacious, so insulting, it was almost beautiful in its ugliness. They were worried about me. They were being considerate. They had uninvited me from my only daughter's wedding as an act of kindness. Let me see if I understand, I said, my voice as cold as ice. Your consideration for my well-being extends to banning me from the event, but still expecting me to pay for it in its entirety. Is that the shape of your concern, Julian? Now, Eleanor, there's no need to be dramatic, he said, his voice hardening. This is easily rectified. Just call the vendors, tell them it was a mistake by your lawyer, and we can put this all behind us. Chloe is very upset, I have no doubt that she is, I replied. But the letters from my lawyer were not a mistake. They are a statement of fact. My financial support for this event is over. You and Chloe will need to make other arrangements. There was a sharp intake of breath. He was losing control. You can't do this, he hissed. We have contracts. Deposits have been paid. Deposits that I paid, I reminded him gently. Consider them a final gift. A wedding present, if you will. The rest, however, is your responsibility. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a real estate agent waiting for me. We are discussing the sale of my house, I heard a gasp on the other end of the line. It was Chloe. She had snatched the phone back. You're selling the house? Our house? It has not been your house for a very long time, dear, I said softly. And soon, it will no longer be my house either. Where will you go? What about us? What about holidays? What about the grandchildren? The panic was escalating into a frantic, incoherent spiral. She was throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. Grandchildren. The final, desperate trump card. The implied promise of future access to my babysitting services. I suppose you'll have to find a new venue for holidays, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. As for me, I have my own plans. I've always wanted to see Tuscany in the spring. Tuscany, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You can't afford Tuscany. Who do you think you are? And there it was. The core of their belief system, laid bare. The condescension, the complete and utter misjudgment of who I was and what I was capable of. They had built their entire strategy around a fictional version of me, and that fiction had just crumbled into dust. That's an excellent question, Chloe, I said, and for the first time, I allowed a hint of something other than coldness into my voice. A hint of triumph. Why don't you and Julian come over tomorrow afternoon? Say, 3 o'clock. And I'll answer it for you. We have a lot to discuss. I hung up the phone before she could reply. The silence that filled my house this time was the silence of victory. The checkmate was in sight. They arrived at 3 o'clock on the dot, a united front of simmering resentment and confusion. Chloe's eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, her expression a mixture of anger and bewilderment. Julian stood slightly behind her, his arms crossed, affecting an air of detached annoyance that did nothing to hide the panic flickering in his eyes. He was a man who prided himself on control, and the situation had spiraled far beyond his influence. I had spent the morning preparing. Not by baking or tidying, but by setting a stage. On the coffee table in the living room, I had placed 3 things. A copy of the text message Chloe had sent me, printed out and lying face up. A thick, bound document from Mr. Davies's office labeled the Eleanor Davison Trust, and next to it, the glossy travel brochure for my 2-month Italian sojourn. I greeted them at the door, and led them into the living room, gesturing for them to sit on the sofa opposite my armchair. I remained standing. I wanted the physical advantage of height, the subtle dynamic of a speaker addressing an audience. They sat, stiff and uncomfortable, their eyes immediately drawn to the objects on the table. Thank you for coming, I began, my voice calm and measured. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a board meeting, not a mother speaking to her child. I thought it was important we clear up any and all misunderstandings in person. Chloe spoke first, her voice trembling with accusation. Mom, how could you? After everything we've planned. You've ruined everything. Our dream wedding is ruined. Let's be precise, Chloe, I said, my gaze steady. I didn't ruin your dream wedding. I simply declined to continue funding it after I was uninvited. Your dream, as it turns out, was contingent upon my money, but not my presence. That is the issue we need to discuss, Julian scoffed, leaning forward. This is ridiculous. It was a text message, Eleanor. A simple miscommunication. You're blowing this completely out of proportion, and I think you're doing it just to hurt Chloe. Hurt her. I let out a short, dry laugh, devoid of humor. Let me tell you about hurt, Julian. Hurt is spending 30 years dedicating your every waking moment to your child's happiness. Hurt is putting your own dreams on hold so she can pursue hers. Hurt is paying for her education, her car, her apartment, and forgiving her debts without a second thought. Hurt is watching her choose a partner who looks down on her family and everything she came from. And then, hurt is being told that you, the architect of her entire life, are not welcome to witness the most important day of it because you don't fit the vibe. That, Julian, is hurt. What you are experiencing now is not hurt. It is consequences. I picked up the printed text message and held it up. This was not a miscommunication. This was a dismissal. This was the culmination of years of you both viewing me as a function, not a person. A bank. An emotional support animal. A free-of-charge event planner. And when my function was fulfilled and my physical form became an inconvenience, I was to be discarded. I let the paper flutter back down to the table. Chloe was openly crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Julian's jaw was tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. So I decided to take your advice, I continued, my voice softening slightly, but losing none of its steel. I decided to make things more convenient. For me. You wanted me out of your life, so I am removing myself. Not just from the wedding, but from the financial entanglement that has clearly defined our relationship. I gestured to the trust document. This is my new reality. It's a legal structure designed to protect my assets. My assets, Chloe. Not your inheritance. Not your emergency fund. Mine. And then, for the final act, I picked up the travel brochure. You asked me where I was going, how I could possibly afford Tuscany. You see, this is the grand miscalculation you both made. You saw this house, my old clothes, my frugal habits, and you built a narrative of a simple woman with simple means. You never once thought to ask me about my life, about my partnership with your father. You never knew that he and I were a team, building a future you couldn't even conceive of. You saw a widow in a quiet house. You should have seen a queen in her castle, sitting on a treasury you never knew existed. I looked directly at Chloe, my heart aching for the daughter I had lost, but my resolve unbroken. Your father and I built a fortune, darling. Not to spoil you, but to secure our own future. The future you and Julian tried to plan for me, a slow fade into a manageable condo, was a pathetic fraction of the life I am about to live. I told them the number. I didn't say it to brag or to wound. I said it to make the truth undeniable. I stated the full, 8-figure sum of my net worth, calmly and clearly. The effect was staggering. Chloe's crying stopped, replaced by a look of slack-jawed, utter disbelief. Julian's face went pale, a sickly white shade. The arrogance drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. He looked from me to the trust document to Chloe, the gears in his mind grinding, calculating the monumental scale of his misjudgment. So, you see, I concluded, my voice now gentle. You didn't uninvite a frail, lonely old woman from your wedding. You uninvited your single biggest benefactor. You threw away a lifetime of love and support, all for the sake of an aesthetic. You had a choice. You could have had a mother who would have given you the world, or you could have a perfectly curated wedding. You chose the wedding. I hope it's beautiful. You'll have to send me the link to the live stream. The silence that followed my revelation was the most profound one yet. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and arrogance out of the room. Chloe stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, as if seeing me for the first time. The tears had stopped, replaced by the glassy-eyed shock of someone whose entire reality has been upended. Julian, the master of condescension, looked utterly defeated. He sank back into the sofa cushions, his posture crumbling. The mask was gone, and underneath was just a small, greedy man who had made a catastrophic error. He had gambled on my weakness, and lost to a strength he never knew existed. There were no more arguments, no more accusations. The fight had gone out of them, extinguished by the sheer, overwhelming weight of the truth. They had not just been disrespectful, they had been fools. And the knowledge of it was a punishment more potent than any anger I could have thrown at them. After a long, heavy moment, Chloe whispered, her voice a hoarse croak, "I didn't know it was a pathetic defense, but it was also the absolute truth." And that was the heart of the tragedy. They never knew because they never asked. They never cared to look past the surface of Mom to see the woman who lived underneath. "No," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You didn't. And now you do." I didn't ask them to leave. I simply stood, waiting. After another minute that stretched into an eternity, Julian stood up, pulling a still-dazed Chloe to her feet. They moved towards the door like automatons, their movements stiff and unnatural. At the threshold, Chloe turned back, her face a mess of confusion, regret, and a dawning, desperate understanding of what she had thrown away. "Mom," she started, but the word trailed off. What was there to say? An apology now would be meaningless, tainted by the knowledge of what she had lost, not who she had hurt. I simply gave her a small, sad nod. A nod of closure. And then I closed the door behind them. The click of the latch echoed in the sudden quiet of the house. I walked back into the living room and stood for a moment, breathing in the silence. It was clean. Purged. The air felt lighter. The ghosts of obligation were gone. In the following weeks, my life transformed with a speed that was breathtaking. The real estate agent was as good as her word. The house, staged to perfection and marketed as a prime property with classic charm and unlimited potential, sold in 12 days for well over the asking price. I took only what mattered: my books, my memories of Robert, my drafting tools. The rest was sold, donated, or left for the new owners. The downsizing was not a loss, it was a liberation. I found a penthouse apartment in a new building overlooking the bay. It was all glass and steel and light, the polar opposite of the house I had left behind. It had a sleek, modern kitchen where I learned to cook for one, and a spare bedroom that I converted not into a guest room, but into an art studio. I bought a huge canvas and an expensive set of oil paints. I had no idea what I would paint, but the possibility was intoxicating. Mr. Davies handled the last of the legal loose ends. The downsized wedding, I heard through him, did happen. It was a small, quiet affair at a local restaurant, paid for by Julian's parents. I was not invited, not even to the live stream this time. I felt nothing about it. It was an event in someone else's life, a story I was no longer a part of. My story was just beginning. The day before I was due to fly to Italy, I sat on my new balcony, a glass of crisp, cold Sauvignon Blanc in my hand, and watched the ships glide across the water. The sea was vast and blue and full of promise. I thought of Chloe and Julian, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something like pity. They were trapped in their small, curated world, forever chasing a lifestyle they thought they deserved. They would spend their lives looking over their shoulders, haunted by the ghost of the fortune they had so casually discarded. My freedom, I realized, was not just financial. It was the freedom from their expectations, from their judgment, from the endless, draining weight of their entitlement. I had bought my own life back. And it was priceless. My final act before leaving for the airport was to address the last ghosts of my old life. I had packed Chloe's and Michael's things from the old house into a clean, climate-controlled storage unit. I paid for 1 year in advance. I sent them each a registered letter containing the key, the address, and the payment receipt. My letter was brief and final. Dear Chloe and Michael, it read. The contents of this unit are items from your childhood and past. I have paid for the storage for 1 year. After that, the responsibility for them will be yours. I wish you both well. Sincerely, your mother. It was a severing, not of love, but of responsibility. I would always be their mother, but I would no longer be their caretaker, their storage facility, or their safety net. I was drawing a boundary not of anger, but of self-preservation. Then, I drove to the airport. Checking in my single, perfectly packed suitcase, and walking toward the international terminal felt like crossing a threshold into a new dimension. The air buzzed with a dozen different languages, the scent of coffee and jet fuel, the palpable energy of departure and arrival. It was the smell of possibility. My seat was in first class, a luxury I had afforded myself without a second's guilt. As the plane soared above the clouds, leaving the coastline of my old life behind, I didn't look back. I opened a book on the art of the Italian Renaissance and ordered a glass of champagne. The 2 months that followed were a revelation. In Tuscany, I lived in a stone villa surrounded by olive groves and cypress trees. I woke with the sun, drank strong coffee on a terrace overlooking the rolling hills, and spent my days exploring. I drove a tiny Fiat down narrow country roads, getting lost and discovering ancient villages perched on hilltops. I took a cooking class and learned to make pasta from a woman named Sophia, who was 80 years old and had hands as strong as a blacksmith's. I started sketching again, first in a small notebook, then on larger pads. I drew the gnarled trunks of olive trees, the texture of ancient stone walls, the play of light on a vineyard at dusk. The architect in me was stirring, reawakening. In Rome, I was a different person. I traded the rustic villa for a chic apartment near the Campo de' Fiori. I walked for miles every day, through bustling piazzas and quiet, cobblestoned alleys. I visited the Forum, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, not as a tourist ticking off a list, but as a student. I would sit for hours, just looking, absorbing the genius of the engineering, the ambition of the artistry. I felt a kinship with those long-dead Roman architects, a shared understanding of foundations and structures, of how to build something that lasts. I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in my adult life, my own company was enough. I was interesting to myself. I had thoughts I wanted to explore, ideas I wanted to chase. The constant, low-level anxiety of worrying about my children's happiness, an anxiety that had been the background noise of my life for decades, was gone. In its place was a quiet, scented peace. One afternoon, sitting at a cafe in Piazza Navona, I received an email from Mr. Davies. It was an offer on a small, neglected property I had flagged for him before I left, a historic brownstone in a part of the city that was undergoing a renaissance. It was undervalued, structurally sound, but in need of vision. My vision. I replied immediately. By it the plan was already forming in my mind. I would return not to a life of leisure, but to a project. My project. I would restore that building. I would pour my knowledge, my passion, and my resources into it. I wouldn't be building a home for a family, I would be resurrecting a piece of history, creating spaces for new lives to unfold. It was the work I was born to do, the work I had deferred for a lifetime. On my last night in Rome, I walked to the Trevi fountain. I didn't throw a coin in. I didn't need to wish for a return to Rome, I knew I would be back. I stood and watched the water cascading over the triumphant stone figures, a monument to power and beauty. And I thought about the nature of family, of love, and of worth. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that you cannot make someone value you. You can only set your own value, and live a life that reflects it. Those who are meant to be in that life will find a way to respect it. Those who don't, were never really there for you to begin with. The story I've shared with you isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about rewriting the ending to your own story, when someone else tries to edit you out. It's about the quiet, formidable power of a woman who has been underestimated for the last time. What would you do if your love was treated like a transaction? What would you do if you were handed the key to your own cage? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if my story has resonated with you, if you believe in the power of quiet strength and a well-executed plan, then please subscribe. Because the restoration of Eleanor Davison has only just begun.